Hello friends, welcome to bspsolutions.com. My name is Sumit, and in this video we'll be going to learn how to use batch apex in Salesforce. And batch apex is used to run large jobs. So let's assume we would be updating thousands of or millions of records, and definitely they would exceed the normal processing limits. So So just to avoid that situation, just to avoid the waiting situation or exceeding the processing limit situation, we can invoke a batch class, and that job is placed on the Apex job queue and is executed as a discrete transaction instead of as a continuous transaction. And the advantage of using batch apex is that every transaction starts with a new set of governor limits, which make it easier to ensure that the code which we are executing, the code we are running, it stays within the governor execution limits. And one more advantage is that let's suppose that if one of the batch fails to process successfully, so it won't stop the execution of the programs. The other successful batch transactions, they aren't rolled back only because of the failed transaction, failed batch process. So these are a couple of advantages using batch apex class in Salesforce. Now let's see how to create a batch apex class in Salesforce. Let's learn how to do that. And in order to do that, we'd be going to take an example where we would be updating the lead records from lead object using batch apex. And in order to do that, I'm going to launch developer console, and here I will be creating a new class named as lead processor. So I create a new class, apex class named as lead processor. And because we are going to create a batch, so I make it as global, I define it as global, and we are going to implement, so I'm going to implement the database dot batchable interface. So I'm going to implement database dot batchable interface, and this we are operating on objects, standard objects. So I write s object, and because it's an interface, database.batchable is an interface. So in this interface, we need to include the three methods: start method as start method, execute method, and finish method. And in order to define them, let's see how to do that. So first of all, I create a method. So I'm going to define a global method, global void execute, global void execute, and I'll take parameter as database dot batchable context, comma, list object for list instance. We'll be creating an instance for lead object as list type. So L underscore list. It's a void method, so it won't returning anything. Save it. So you can see now two errors are left. The next function which we need to involve with, that is the start method. So start function, global database dot query locator start, database dot batchable context, and its return type will be database dot query locator. So I would be returning, let's say I'll return null right now. So right now it's not returning anything, and in same manner we are going to define the third function. This is, that is the finish function. So public void finish, and database dot batchable context, and there is no return type for this function. So all the errors are resolved. Now let's finish these functions. Now in very first function, I'm going to extract, because this would be starting the execution, so it would be returning the records from the lead object. So I return database dot query locator. Now this query locator is a function. We are accessing the external object, and those external object we want to use in batch apex. So we will be using database dot query locator for doing that. And remember one thing, the default batch size is 200 records. So if you are not providing any limit, by default it will be running 300 uh, records at a time. So, so database dot query locator, and this would be returning. So database dot get query locator, and it is asking for a string. So I write a string, I pass a string, select ID, comma lead source from lead where company name, or let's assume that we are not writing any query, because here in this lead, when we switch to leads, we have records where we have the company name as, I'll just save it, where we have company name as bisp.com. But let's assume that we are not writing or extracting any specific records. So I would be extracting all the records, so I'm not writing any query. So simple. So it will return the lead source and ID to the extracted query, where we will be going to call it. So in execute method, I create a new instance for lead object as list type is equal to new list of lead, and we are running a loop for lead l underscore list, and l dot, we are updating the record. So lead source is equal to web, and l underscore list underscore new. So that is so I'm going to, it's a new list, so is equal to new list, and here is equal to new dot add l. And also I created and just for increment, and finally we would be update l underscore list underscore. And also, because this is throwing an error message for variable count does not exist, so I quickly initialize global integer count is equal to 0. So the error is resolved. Unexpected token, the error is for loop line number 11. So new, now the error is resolved. And in finish, I'm simply displaying the how many records has been updated. So system dot debug, and it will be displaying the how many records has been updated. Count is equal to plus count. So let's save this. In order to test this, I'm going to create a test class just to make sure that it is working perfectly fine. So I create a new Apex class and I call it as lead processor test. Let's say 2018. I give the name because it's a test class. So the very first statement is test, and here we are going to create a test function. So is test function. So public static void test it. That's the function name, and list lead L underscore list is equal to new list lead. I will make it as bigger, and the default is 200, so I'm going to execute 200. I'm just testing it for 200. So right, for integer I is equal to 0, I less than 200, I plus plus. So we are testing it on 200 records. Lead L is equal to new lead, and we are updating record. So lead L dot last name is equal to name plus I. L dot company is equal to BISP. L dot status is equal to let's say random, any status, and finally L dot L underscore list dot add L. And once we insert, so I just write insert query, insert L underscore, it's list, so list list L underscore list. Let me, yeah, fine, list, this insert list, and we are going to test it. So I write test dot start test. This is for testing, and we create an instance for lead processor to test it. So I create an instance for lead processor. So this lead processor is equal to new lead processor, and we are creating ID. So batch ID is equal to database dot execute batch. Now there are two things. We can only pass the Apex object batchable or integer size. So if you want to if you want to set a limit, we can go for the second option. Else we'll go with the first option. And the batchable here I'm passing LP. And finally test dot stop test. And this also goes. So all the errors are resolved. Now let's test it. And in order to test it, I simply click on test and run all. So all the test files will be start executing. So you will see couple of errors. Not an issue. We'll be concentrating on this particular test class, that is a lead processor test 2018. And if I expand it, we'll look for lead processor test 2018. So I just rename it. It was throwing some error message, was not showing this due to some numbers. So I just rename it and call it a lead processor test. And you can see this lead processor test is successfully done. It is completed successfully. And lead processor test So when we double click on it, we can see its details. Lead processor test. So it was running lead processor test of this function byte, and it runs successfully. So this is how we can test the batch execution. And now if we want to invoke this batch class, and how to do that, the simplest way is we are going to schedule it. So what we are going to do, we will be going to create a new batch. We are going to schedule a new apex class. So we'll be going to create a new class and schedule it, and then set it as schedule apex. And there also we are going to pass this statement. That's all. Lead processor LP is equal to lead processor and IP. So that's how we can create a schedule or batch apex classes in Salesforce. So that's all in this video. If you have any queries, you can post your comments in comment box. You can visit our website for more details, more updates about Salesforce consulting services as well as training. Keep watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.